You and me work together, we might finally win. I have been through the stormy weather already, so let's begin to climb the mountaintop. Don't be afraid. The lightning, it's here to give us energy, energy. Fly up into the clouds, sunset. Down from the mountain top, yeah, got it right. Bust out at the sea, yeah. Even the space creatures can see you flying. I am not the last one, I'm not the first, I'm just a man in the middle, oh yeah. Don't play those monkey games with me. I'm gonna stop throwing your ball if you don't wanna play nicely. Remember, we have the power inside. There's no need to hide. Oh, time to get on the vibe. The one that's gonna help us live life. So won't you fly where the clouds and sunset?
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Bayless. I oversee the Civic and Social Information Services work at Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. And I'd like to welcome you all to the Power of Positive Human Interaction. Today's event is the last of our 2021 Civic CLP Speaker Series lineup and is supported through generous funding from the Pittsburgh Foundation. This event is being recorded and will be shared with all registered attendees. However, access to the recording will be limited to 1 month, so please make sure to watch sooner than later if you've missed this live event. As you listen to Ken speak, you are encouraged to share questions for him in the chat or Q&A sections found at the bottom of your screen in Zoom, and we'll do our best to address those within the time allotted at the end. Finally, the following community agreements have been written for this virtual event. By participating today through Q&A or chat, you are agreeing to the following. Everyone in this virtual environment has the same fundamental values as I do, and I will not belittle or demean anyone in the space. Speak in I statements that do not generalize beyond my own experiences. Participants represent only themselves and are not representatives of social groups or political parties. Attending with the intention to engage with others and be in community, not to hurt each other or score points for argumentation. Don't oversimplify complex events or topics. Embrace the blurry or confusing parts of an issue. Listen harder when I disagree and notice my own defensive reactions, and to stay engaged rather than closed off to reach a deep point of understanding. Approach this virtual event with curiosity by asking questions rather than making assumptions about what others mean. And finally, to challenge myself to say what I really mean by communicating directly, honestly, and genuinely. And with that, it is my absolute pleasure to hand it over to our speaker today, Ken Nwadike Jr. with the Free Hugs Project. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Appreciate the intro. Well, I am really excited to be connecting with you all today. It has been, of course, a very interesting year, even for me, just with being home a lot more. Usually I'm out on the front lines of riots and protests, and I'm in police departments and working with law enforcement agencies to work on better de-escalation tactics around many of these issues that we've been facing over the years as a society. And so it's exciting to be connecting with you all in such a way to just share about not only the work that I do, but the progress and progression that it took me to get to this place of being a peace activist and being known as someone who travels into areas of conflict to de-escalate violence out on the front lines. And that's really the topic of today as we focus on the power of positive human interaction. My goal is that throughout sharing my story that you'll see that some of the interactions that I've had with people have been not only life-changing for myself, but sometimes for the others that I come into contact with. And so it just shows how important it is that we really engage in positive interactions with one another, especially right now at a time when we just came off of a year and a half, 2 years almost of just things being really different. people spending a lot of time on their own or quarantined into themselves because of this pandemic. And so now as we try to adjust back into some sense of normalcy and getting out there into the real world again, to really put focus on those interactions and make sure that we are very intentional in the way that we connect with others around us, whether coworkers or people that we go to school with, or just in our general community, or even in our households. So as I'll go through my presentation, I'll be sharing some video slides of some of the work that I've been up to. This first one here is just a quick mashup of some of my work over the years for those who are not familiar with the Free Hugs Project, and then we'll jump right into it.
Doesn't make you a criminal.
Awesome. So as you saw in the video slide there, I spend a lot of work out in areas of conflict, and I usually go into the middle to try and be a bridge for people from opposite sides to find common sense solutions, to be able to find common ground that they can stand on, especially when I'm out on the front lines of riots and protests. And of course, in being out there, there's always a large law enforcement presence. And it's been really interesting over the years that now this has become my work, to where I interact with law enforcement officers or even go into their departments to work on trainings. And, you know, when you look at that last clip there of the officer who hugged me and ran away with me, even as I share or watch footage like that, I always feel like I've come such a long way to reach this point in doing this for work. Because I grew up in communities where there was so much distrust between people from the community and law enforcement, and probably even vice versa. And so even for me, my earliest interactions that I had with law enforcement date back to when I was about 8 years old. My family, we were living in Seattle, Washington at the time. I was coming home from school with my brother, and as we got close to the house, my brother tapped me and said, "Hey, Kenny, do you notice all those guys dressed in black surrounding the house?" And I looked around and I said, "Yeah, I don't know why they're here, but Mom and Dad's cars are in the driveway. Let's just rush into the house as fast as possible." And as I got to the front door to turn the doorknob, these men who were surrounding the house came rushing in right behind my brother and I. And they grabbed my dad, who was watching TV in the living room, and they start to force him into handcuffs. And of course, as an 8-year-old boy, my dad was my hero. I couldn't imagine him doing anything wrong. And so I immediately assumed they were the bad guys. And so as I'm hitting and kicking them, my mom took me to the side, and she had explained that my dad had gotten involved in some illegal activities, and she said he's probably going to be going away for a while. And she decided at that time to take all 5 kids in our family, and she moved us to South Central Los Angeles. And we got there at probably the worst year that a new family could have moved to South Central LA. The year was 1991. For those of you that follow history closely, you'll know that was the year of the Rodney King beating, which then led to the LA riots. And while we were there in LA, literally in the heart of where these riots unfolded, we were still a new family trying to get on our feet. And so we were living in a homeless shelter downtown as these riots broke out. And I remember at that time, as everyone would go out to loot in the stores as the riots were taking place, I remember asking my mom, if we're poor and we're living in this shelter, how come we're not out there with everyone else? And I love how my mother took that as an opportunity to really teach my siblings and I about the work of Dr. Martin Luther King. And she said, you know, during times like this, here's what a peacekeeper like himself would have done. He would have worked towards bringing people together and creating unity. And so at such a young age, I became very fascinated with the work of peacekeepers, not only Dr. King, but Gandhi, Mother Teresa, and people like that. And of course, at that age, there wasn't much that I could have done to change what was going on in the riots there. But I did find how some of those things began to shape my way of thinking and the way that I would go on to interact with people in the future, which then led to now the work that I do today. But back then, I had trouble even standing up to my own bullies. Like when I would walk through the halls in my middle school, even up through high school, I was usually the kid that would just keep my hands in my pocket, head down towards the ground, and try and keep to myself, because I had spent so many years of people giving me a hard time, because when you're the poor kid in school, I never really had the cool clothes or the cool shoes. And so I got picked on because of that. And fortunately, one of those first interactions that really started to change who I was from a track coach who was walking in the opposite direction of me one day as I was in high school. And he stopped me and said, how come every time I walk past you, you're looking down at the ground? You should look up. And I had let him know how usually if I look up, I notice when people give me dirty looks or if they have mean things to say about what I'm wearing. So I just try and tune it out. And he said, well, you can't get through life like that. I've got to get you around some positive and encouraging people. And so he invited me to come out and join the track team. And I told him I've never played a sport before, but I'll bring it up to my mom and see what she thinks. So I went back to the shelter and I asked my mom, what does she think of me joining the track team at the high school? And she said, we can't afford any extracurricular activities, but if you could figure out how to make it happen on your own, go for it. So I said, okay. So during that winter break, I remembered that in my PE class, people would leave behind old gym clothes or old running shoes that they didn't want anymore right before we went on break. And so I grabbed some of those out of the locker room and I started training with the team. And this was my first time throughout my early school years that I really felt this sense of brotherhood and belonging. We would go out on these training runs and they would just ask me, like, how's school doing? And, you know, how come they never even see me around campus? And, you know, it felt good to be noticed and to be recognized during that time. And so by the time track season started, I told the coach that I'm really interested in running the mile. And he said, I would love for you to run the mile, but I was talking with your counselor here at the school. Turns out your family is living in a homeless shelter outside of the school district, and they're looking to transfer you to a charter school downtown. And I was crushed. I felt like I finally have friends here. I'm doing something that I enjoy, which was running track. And now they wanted to transfer me to this charter school where there were no sports. And I knew that most of the kids that were attending that charter school didn't want to be there in the first place because some of them were living in the shelter that I was living in, and they would just tell me about how awful this place was. So I pleaded with the coach. I let him know, look, I'll do whatever it takes for me to be able to stay here at this school and remain on the team. And he said, well, you got to promise me that you're going to keep your grades up. You know, they require a 2.0 average to run. If you could keep that above a 3.0, I'll use that as leverage. But also, if I let you into this first race, you've got to run as fast as you can. So I said, all right, deal. So he let me run in the mile, and I ended up running my first mile in 4 minutes and 17 seconds. And that 4 minute and 17 second mile pretty much changed the course of my life. I went from being this kid at the school that just felt invisible for most of my years to where now I'm showing up on the front cover of local sports newspapers. And that started to draw the attention of college scouts and coaches that would come out to see me run while I was in high school. And that just felt really good. Not only the recognition, but the fact that I started getting all of these scholarship offers really early on. And so I ended up going to college on a full ride track and field scholarship. After college, I ran track with Nike as I was training to get to the Olympic trials. I wanted to compete in the games in Beijing. And every day that I would leave track practice with Nike, all I could think of were all of these kids that I grew up in and out of the shelters with that would probably never have a similar opportunity as what I had. Just someone coming into their life and recognizing that they're pretty much down on their luck or struggling with some things and trying to figure out what they can do to change their circumstances in the same way that that coach did for me. And so I would leave track practice and volunteer my time every day as a peer mentor to these youth. And I was really disheartened in finding that whenever I would ask them what they aspire to be, many of them didn't know or didn't care. And I would say, look, you're about to turn 18 soon. You at least have to have a goal or a vision for what you plan to do after you age out of the program here. Most of the time they would just shrug their shoulders, say they don't know or they didn't care. And then I started to realize that sometimes when people are that down on their luck, or they just feel like life has been really difficult for them, sometimes you have to show them a different path. And I knew that for them, it was going to take being able to do something extraordinary. And so I said, why don't we create an event together? We'll call it the Hollywood Half Marathon. Let's shut down Hollywood Boulevard and we'll get tens of thousands of people to come out and run in this race. And then we'll raise funds and awareness for homeless youth. And we'll be able to change the conditions of the shelter that they were living in. And so they were super excited about it. So I called up LAPD and I said, how much would it cost to shut down Hollywood Boulevard for 13 miles for us to hold a half marathon? And the officer who answered the phone, he laughed and said, well, that's pretty much impossible. Shutting down Hollywood Boulevard, they usually only do it for the Academy Awards or like if they're filming a major motion picture. And so he said he's definitely not going to do it for just some kids that are living in a homeless shelter. And sadly, we were on speakerphone at the time, so they heard that call. And right away, they were just really discouraged. And they said, see, Ken, things like that don't happen for people like us. And I didn't want them to give up hope so quick. So I wanted to try and figure out a way to really get them to see we're going to push through with this and we're not going to take the first no for an answer. So I reached out to the media and to see if they can share our story. And here's a quick news clip from back then.
This Saturday is the Hollywood Half Marathon, which will benefit a local shelter. Now, the man organizing this 13-mile event knows quite a bit about running, but also about being homeless. Kerry Berglund with his story.
To look at these pictures of Ken Nwadike in high school, you'd never guess that he and his 4 siblings and his mom were homeless, living in a shelter. And that was the point.
So was it a secret?
Of course it was a secret. There's no way you could let something like that out in high school. It would have ruined me.
Ken had no choice. He had to grow up fast.
We were having to figure out how we're going to take care of the other kids in the house, So we're really standing on chairs to cook on the stove. We're standing on chairs to wash the dishes before mom gets back.
Still, somehow Ken excelled, especially in sports. He was a track star.
You couldn't even enjoy being a star athlete.
No, not at all. Not at all. It was never,
because there are perks to that.
Of course there are. I could have had a girlfriend. I could have had a lot of things. But how can you have a girlfriend if, you're going home to a homeless shelter? There's nothing that I had that I felt I can impress anyone with. There was nothing that I had except I can run the mile fast.
Fast forward to today, and Ken is a race director, bringing everything full circle. The homeless track star has started a race to benefit homeless shelters, and specifically here in Hollywood, Covenant House, California, that gets homeless youth back on their feet.
So after that news clip got out, to my surprise, a number of celebrities in LA, they started to reach out saying they want to not only participate in the race, but help spread the word. And one of the first celebrities actually was Ron Artest, who was playing for the Lakers at the time. He was one of the former Indiana Pacers that was involved in that brawl where they climbed into the fans or into the stands and were fighting with fans. And during that time, when he reached out, he was rebranding himself and changed his name to Meta World Peace. And he said, look, I love what you're doing. I want to help spread the word. After him, there were a number of other like 80s celebrities, Sean Astin from Lord of the Rings and the Goonies. And then a dear friend of mine, actually, Kimmy Gibbler from Full House. She had messaged me and said, hey, I'm going to bring Stephanie and DJ out, and we're going to participate in this event that you're organizing. And so before you knew it, we had well over 10,000 people that had registered to run in this race. And I raised just shy of $1 million. And so I was able to call back to the LAPD department that I had previously spoken to. I said, I've got $1 million now. Can we talk about shutting down Hollywood Boulevard for this half marathon? And so they had me come in for this city planning meeting to organize the event. And I was really taken back walking into this meeting, because as I got there, there were people from the Department of Transportation, people from City Council, but also 75 uniformed police officers in the room. And the last time that I had interacted with law enforcement, especially that many officers in one place, was during the police raid when my father was being removed from the house. And now here I was in this room explaining to these officers what the race course was going to look like for this half marathon, where I was going to be closing down such a major iconic road as Hollywood Boulevard, but also closing down freeway on and off ramps in a city that is already known for having horrendous traffic in Los Angeles. And now here I was asking permission to be able to do this. And fortunately, that permission was granted, and we pulled it off. We ended up shutting down 13.1 miles in Los Angeles on Hollywood Boulevard for this half marathon. And we were able to raise so much money for many of the homeless shelters that I grew up in and out of. And here's a quick clip of what the Hollywood half marathon looked like as we got 10,000 people out there onto the boulevard.
I had a lot of fun. I've been talking to participants and people thought it was a fantastic event.
Shamefully, yes, that is me dressed up as Michael Jackson there. I was trying to match a lot of the 80s stars that came out to participate in this event. But the really cool thing about that was the young people that I was mentoring in the shelter. They were not only part of the event as volunteers, but they got to see someone who, just like themselves, grew up in and out of the same shelters that they grew up in, and was able to come back and pay it forward. And so as we were presenting to the shelters these large oversized checks as a way of saying thank you for what they were able to do for my family and friends that I grew up with in and out of the shelters, that felt really special. And it inspired a lot of the young people to now start coming back to me and saying, hey, you know, I'm talented at this, or I want to enroll back in school, which was a total shift from where they were just weeks prior when I would ask them what they aspired to do in the future, and many of them didn't know or didn't care. And it just seemed like they were so much more willing to share after now being a part of that experience together. And so I knew because of that, I wanted to continue producing this race and make it an annual thing. So that next morning after our race, we had our debrief meeting with the police, and our race took place the first Sunday in April back in 2013. And so that next day was Patriots Day, Monday morning. And so as we're in this planning meeting, I'm letting them know, well, it's Patriots Day. The Boston Marathon is being run today. Here's the race that we aspire to be like as we continue to build on our event. And as many of you know, back in 2013, during the Boston Marathon, terrorists placed bombs at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. And we were all just really shocked and taken back by it, because we're in this planning meeting together talking about ways to improve on our event when that first breaking news headline came out about what happened there in Boston. And I was just so hurt and taken back by it, because I felt like this sport of running and the people that I've met throughout my years of running have really helped change not only the conditions of my life, but also my ability to inspire other young people that were struggling in the same way that I was. And so I felt like I owed so much to the sport. And so right away, I launched this campaign to try and get as many people as possible to run in the next Boston Marathon, because I didn't want people to start to feel intimidated in participating in these sort of events, thinking that tragedies like that could easily reoccur. Because even right away, as we were in that planning meeting, the police were sharing with me how budgets are going to skyrocket for events like that, because now you're going to need better security, bomb sniffing dogs, all of it. And so due to that, I launched this campaign to try and get as many people to come out and participate in the next Boston Marathon. And in doing so, I started getting so many emails from people saying, hey, Ken, are you going to run in the next Boston Marathon? And I was like, wait, whoa, I can run 1 mile really fast. I have never run 26.2 miles in my life. And after just continually getting messages from people about it, I reached out to my coach at Nike and I asked if he could put together a training program for me to compete in the Boston Marathon. And even he didn't believe in me. He was like, look, Ken, you're not built for that. You've got tops a good 5 miles in you and then you're going to die. So because of that, I was really determined to try and run the qualifying time that it would take to get into the Boston Marathon. And for my age group, it happened to be one of the fastest times that you needed to run. It was 3 hours and 5 minutes for a marathon. And so that was a steady pace of about 6 minutes and something seconds per mile times 26.2 miles, something I had never done before. And so I knew it would take me a year to try and pull it off. And so I trained for about a year. I picked the qualifier race that I would use to try and get to Boston. And in that qualifier race, I was feeling good the entire way. And right as I'm coming through the finishing chute, I look up at the clock and the time was 3 hours and 5 minutes. But right as I crossed, it was 3 hours, 5 minutes, 0.11 seconds. So now here I was after training for almost a year. And now because of 11 seconds, I was unable to attend the Boston Marathon. And so I didn't want to take that as just the end all be all. And I knew that there was still something good that I needed to do there. And so I went back to these kids that I was mentoring at the shelter and I had asked them, hey, what do you guys think since I can't run in the race, what do you think if I print free hugs on a t-shirt and I fly out to Boston anyway, and I set up on the race course to just be this symbol of love, to be this example of people coming together. And they looked at me and they say, man, Ken, it's about the dumbest idea. I said, why? I mean, it's an opportunity for people to at least just hug it out, especially considering what happened the year before with the bombing that took place there. I feel like we just need a reminder of love being out there at this event. And they said, it's Boston, Ken. Like, no one is going to hug you. And then it's a race. So they're all running to get a good time. So everyone's just going to run right past you. And because I had already purchased my flight to get to Boston anyway, I said, you know what, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to film the experience just to see what happens. And if I can get this positive human interaction out of hundreds or even thousands of people as they're running by in this race, it would just feel good. And maybe I could send a positive message out. And so it was on my flight heading to Boston that doubt started to set in, as I'm thinking, man, I'm flying all the way across the country and probably no one's going to hug me when I get out there. But I was like, it's worth it, even if I get just one hug. And so I filmed that experience, and little did I know that this was going to become the beginning of much of the work that I do today.
Lord, we don't need
So it worked out, and I left there just with my heart feeling so full. I felt like, wow, this was it was such a good opportunity to interact and engage with the thousands of people that had run in that race. That ended up becoming the largest Boston Marathon of all time. Over 50,000 people ran in that race. And I stayed out there for well over 6 hours and hugged probably thousands of runners as they came by, and just felt good as people shared words of encouragement, or they would like even run past me and come back for the hug. People who would just lean on me and just start to cry. And I started to really feel the power of that. And I felt like, how come the world can't just be like this all the time? That we can walk past people and share kind words, or a high five, a hug, whatever it is. It always seems like it's only after tragedy do we start to recognize each other in such a way. And so I wanted to set out and continue being able to spread this message of love. And so as I was flying from Boston back to California, I couldn't wait to prove to the kids that I was mentoring that I did end up getting a bunch of hugs there. And so I uploaded the video to Facebook and YouTube. And little did I know, when my flight landed and I came off the plane, I had never seen so many notifications on my phone in my life as that video had gone viral. And well over 1 million people had seen it as it first got shared by BuzzFeed, then Huffington Post, the New York Times, and Boston Globe. And I'm looking at all of these social media feeds from these news sites that are talking about this feel-good moment that happened at the Boston Marathon. And it was in that moment that I realized maybe I wasn't even supposed to qualify to run in that race. I was supposed to do exactly what I did, which was going out there and just being this example of love and people coming together and just being able to hug it out. And so by the time I got back to the kids that I was mentoring and I wanted to show them this video, they were like, Ken, we know this thing is everywhere, man. We love it. Everyone loves it. We feel like people can see us now. Like for a long time, we've just felt invisible. And here you go and do something like that. And it seems like the whole world is watching right now. And at one point, it really felt like that as I started getting invited out to do all of these different news programs. I did the Good Morning America show. I got flown out to London to do the Good Morning Britain show. And as I was flying around the world to talk about the importance of people coming together in such a way, I went from being initially very excited about the work to starting to feel kind of down and discouraged about it, because I felt like, is the only reason why this is gaining so much attention, is it because it's so rare that we treat each other like this, that it's so uncommon to see just strangers interact in such a way of kindness, sharing a hug, kind words. And so I knew that I've got to figure out a way to change that. But I realized that I have to go into areas where people were really hurting and where there was going to be a great divide, and not just interactions like that at the Boston Marathon, which was great. I loved that interaction, but I knew that this work is calling me into some of the more difficult and scary areas where many people wouldn't want to go to try and spread kindness. And so immediately I began to think of those LA riots that I experienced when I was a boy, and thinking, what difference could it have made if there were more peacekeepers out there on the front lines, just trying to talk with people and to engage in civil discourse and dialogue, to think about going about things in a different way. And so I started to do that. I started to fly out to riots and protests throughout the country to talk with people on the front lines. And although the message on my shirt was still free hugs wasn't necessarily my intent. It was more about civil discourse to get us to move towards a more positive and peaceful resolution to many of the issues that were just becoming very violent and chaotic. And so one interaction that always stands out to me were the riots in Charlotte back in 2016. And as I showed up on the front lines that night, protesters were already throwing rocks and bottles at the police. Police were firing back on the crowd with tear gas and pepper spray. And I just wanted it all to stop. It was really starting to make me think of LA all over again, like when I was a boy. And so I start talking with the protesters, literally as they're looting and taking things out of the stores downtown in Charlotte. And I'm letting them know, look, you guys don't want to do this to your own community. I was there when this happened when I was a boy, and it was like people from our own community. We just ended up destroying our own community. And it took many, many years for some of those areas to recover. Some of them never even came back the way that they once were. And so in sharing this dialogue with people out on the front lines, obviously because my message was different from the masses, it started to form a crowd around me of people saying, you know, what's he talking about? And so as I'm walking and talking with this group of protesters, things took a really interesting turn as we walked past a line of riot police, and they're in their full riot gear. And one of the officers, like the biggest officer there, he stands about 6'7", looks over at me and he sees my shirt and he says, "Hey, do I get one of those hugs?" And I was a little taken back in that moment because I knew, well, one, I'm like trying to get through to all of these protesters. And if they see me go and hug this officer, maybe they'll assume I'm a traitor or they'll think of me differently. And so I paused for a moment. And then the officer asked again, and he said, "Hey, bring it in." And right as I go in to hug this officer, before I could even turn back around to the protesters, just like I assumed, they started picking up the same rocks and bottles that they were throwing at the police. And now they're starting to take aim towards me as they're cursing me out and calling me all sorts of really mean names. And I just felt like, man, I could go into fight or flight mode in moments like that. And I felt like, one, I can't fight my way out of this situation. I'm still really fast. I could probably just run away. But I knew that in that moment, especially as I'm working on more positive outcomes and interactions with people, especially on the front lines, that wasn't the moment to flee, that it was going to be a perfect opportunity to stay and talk with the protesters. So here's some footage from that night in Charlotte.
Wait, whoa, 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 whoa! No. I seen you, bro. Hey, the free hug. Hey, I gotta get me a hug, bro. Swear to God, he came all the way out. That's love, bro. That's love. He ain't even had to come out here, bro. What you did? You know what I'm talking about? Care about you guys, man. Free hug, brother. That's right, brother. Thank you, man. That's right. Thank you for being out there and being peaceful. It's not even like that. Even like that. What you say? He killed somebody? Did he kill somebody? Get that shit. Why'd you know my family? I understand that. I don't understand. I hurt just you. For standing behind him because he's black. If one black person does something, right? We can't say that every black person is bad.
If one white person
does something, we cannot say that every cop is bad. None of these people here shot anyone.
Right, so every Japanese person.
This man gave me a hug and he wants to fight me because of that. How does that make sense? Spreading more hate into the world. I see them as human beings, just like I see everybody on this side as human beings. We're all human. His uniform doesn't make him a robot. Just like your uniform, your skin color doesn't make you a criminal. I'm trying to help you understand.
That's right though. Nobody fucking cares. How?
You already know where he's coming from.
Thank you.
Yeah,
He's speaking from a black people. Yeah, speaks.
That's what I want.
Hey, but still you gotta see where he's coming from.
He takes off his uniform, he's gonna feel the same injustices that we feel. But right now he has a job to do.
I think it's important that we close each other as people. Absolutely. And it's hard to do that with the mask and the helmets, and I understand that.
And be able to go home and tell your kids that one of yours got killed unlawfully and unjustly.
It happens, unfortunately, too often.
Because you signed up for it. We didn't sign up for it.
I didn't sign up to get shot. I didn't sign up to get killed.
None of us signed up to get shot.
I don't want any of you to get shot.
Shoot.
Order to disperse. Failure to disperse, you will be arrested.
Hey, let's get out of here. Come on.
It was that time that I started to recognize that a lot of the things that I had experienced and struggles that I encountered over the years, that much of that was leading me up to not only that moment, but being able to do this as work, and to know that out on the front lines, especially, that there would be a need for peacekeepers and people that can work towards bridging the gap and be able to speak to both sides. And those interactions that I've had out on the front lines with both sides, both protesters and law enforcement, has really helped in creating change on many of the fronts that I've been out at, including that one. One of the things that many people don't see kind of behind the scenes are the continued interactions that take place after moments like that. And the officer, the big guy there, I had let him know, hey, we should go out for coffee and talk about some of the ways that we can really create change on the front lines out here. And he took me up on that offer, and I loved that he did that. And we started getting invited out to do a number of news programs together. And I let him know how I grew up in and out of homeless shelters, and he should see what it's like on the other side of that. And he brought other officers out to help and volunteer. And we brought activists that were out on the front lines, and they were able to both serve together. People who the night or nights earlier at a protest were attacking one another, and now they're serving together in homeless shelters. And we've been able to create a number of different programs, especially even for the youth in communities that were just like the ones where I grew up, where there was a lot of trust between the police and young people from the communities. And we work on ways of changing that narrative. And one of the things that I love doing is challenging the kids to play dodgeball against the cops. And it's funny because when I first presented the idea, neither side wanted to play. And then I told the kids, look, this is the one time you can hit them and get away with it. And so they took me up on that offer. And now for about 4 years in a row, we've had this ongoing competition between the cops and the kids in dodgeball. And not only do they get to have so much fun in doing it, but afterwards we all get to sit down at the same level on the gym floor, and we talk about what change looks like and what does accountability look like, and what many of them aspire to do in the future. And it's just such a powerful thing as I see some of the young people asking the officers for their business cards, and just to be able to connect with them on a more deeper level when they're struggling with some things. And I love just being able to do that as part of this work. And so with the message, of course, being just about positive human interactions, I know that for me, I easily could have gone in a different direction, especially in the way that I view law enforcement, is due to just the way that I saw my dad being removed from the house when I was a boy. And instead, I saw that there was greater work that was necessary. And much of that came through just being able to interact with people over the years in a really like deep and purposeful way. And it has not only created so much change for myself internally, but for people around me. And I think that right now, especially as we're coming out of this pandemic, and just knowing that for the past couple of years, so many people have treated social distancing as social isolation. And that's really tough when you think of how we were already a nation that was struggling with mental health issues and a mental health crisis, actually. And so to know that when so many people have been isolated for even more than the past year, that's hard to now just adjust back into some sense of normalcy. And I think that the best way we're going to be able to do that is to just make sure that the people that we come in contact with, the people that we work with, that we go to school with, that are in our household, that we're just more intentional about those interactions that we have with them, in sharing kindness and understanding that we've all been struggling with things. I know that for myself, even as a parent, especially as I'm dealing with my teenage daughter, I have to make sure that I understand she's had a really rough year, you know, for a teenager to not really be able to interact or engage with their friends in the way that they want to, or for how different school has become. I try and be sensitive to those issues in understanding why she might have an attitude or why she might be behaving differently about certain things. And to know that all of us probably have people in our lives that we just have to be more understanding of what the past couple of years have been like for all of us, and instead just really show people more love, show people more kindness, and not only due to the pandemic, but just in general. We just need to be a society that cares more about the people that are around us. So that is my time, and I would love to take some questions from you all. I think we still have about 15 minutes, but thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Ken. I knew I would feel some feels, but I still wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. The music, oh gosh. Okay, so we had a couple that came in. So you did touch on this, but can you just reiterate what free hugs symbolizes in case people showed up late?
Absolutely, yeah. So free hugs, it's interesting. I think sometimes people think that it literally means a hug, and in some senses it could, but really the message is just about spreading kindness and being available for people who actually want a physical hug, or just that reminder of, like, just be nice to each other, just be kind, spread more love. And so when I'm out on the front lines, you know, there have been people who have challenged me saying, you think you're going to save the world with hugs? I'm like, it's really not even about that. It's about people knowing that I'm here in peace, and that I'm here to promote positivity. And that starts to pave the way for the discussions that I get to have with people on the front lines. It's really difficult for someone to punch you in the face on the front lines if you have a shirt that says free hugs on it. And so I use that as a great opportunity to start conversations. So, yeah.
Love it. Do you think it's possible to be a peacekeeper on social media, and is it worth it?
It's worth it. It's difficult. And yes, it is possible, because I do that regularly, mostly on my own page. Of course, I don't often jump into arguments when people are going back and forth online and trying to get them to tone down. But there have been times where people have posted things online, and I like to kind of hold up a mirror in a sense. Like, there was a buddy of mine who I went to high school with who started posting some really nasty things on social media, and I had to just remind him who I knew him to be. And I said, look, man, the person that I knew you as growing up cannot be the same person that I see that's posting this stuff, man, because that you're posting some really, really hurtful things, and you have to think about how that affects certain communities. And I didn't post that in his comment section. It was like a separate email that I sent to him. And I think holding up that mirror to him, he started not only apologizing to me, but he thanked me for that reminder of just getting back on track and not trying to hurt people. And then he ended up taking down the post. And it wasn't even my intent to get him to take down the post. I think everyone should be able to express themselves in a way that is meaningful to them. But if he recognized on his own that's not the way that message should have come across, then I appreciated that he recognized that and did something about it. So yeah, it's possible, but it isn't easy, especially on social media. But sometimes one of the better ways to do it is via offline discussions with that individual. Send them a private message and say, hey, here's some of the things that I see that can be really hurtful in what you posted.
Okay, we have a question. Have you done any work out in Portland, Oregon?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Portland, probably 2016 through 18, maybe even up through 2020, like 16 through 20. There's just been so many protests that take place there, because I think it's like a hotbed for Antifa and all of these other right-wing groups. And so they clash out there a lot. And so I try and go out there to quell some of the tension that exists there. But Yeah, Portland is a very interesting place, but I've got a soft spot for it, for the work that I do, because I know that they need a lot of help in getting peacekeepers to stand in between to make sure that civil discourse is actually a possibility there.
Okay, this is a three-parter.
Cool.
How can programs like this be supported? Where can you start change like this in local communities? And what's just like a good starting point?
Yes. I would say, so how can programs like this be supported? I think just go out and doing the good work. So I think that probably answers 1 and 2 of the question, is just going out and doing good works. You know, I don't need much. Like, I think the best thing that could happen to me is that this army and movement starts to grow. But as far as monetarily or anything, I'm good. But I think that when we can have ambassadors of peace, ambassadors of change in such a simple way, you know, I think that when people think of ways to change the world, sometimes we think of these really complex and difficult ways to do it, and so that it never gets done. But something as simple as just putting free hugs on a t-shirt and going out and striking up conversations at times when things are really difficult, that can make a huge difference. You know, I was out in Minneapolis during the George Floyd protests. And when I got there, I put out a post on social media and I said, anyone that wants to join me on the front lines to work on helping the community heal, then I'm going to be right at the intersection where they just burned down the police station, the Target, and everything else. And as soon as my flight arrived there, I was shocked to see literally hundreds of people show up with shovels and brooms and trash bags and trash cans. And they're like, Ken, where do we start? And I love that, you know, because there's so many people that are about positive change. And sometimes they just need an ambassador of change, an ambassador of peace that's going to lead the way. And so when we can have an army of people like that around the country, so that whenever things like that start to pop up, that we already know the best solutions for it. We're not going to go out and riot and protest in a way that tears down a community after they just dealt with a very tragic and traumatic event. Let's figure out how to help that community heal so that they can be better coming out of that event. And so that's really the focus of my work. And some people have even challenged me about that out on the front lines, saying, you know, leave the mess out there and leave the graffiti and things out there. Don't paint over their pain. And it's interesting because it's a very good point of discussion, because some people say leave it up as a message of the pain, but as someone who is a product of those environments, I know what then comes with that. I know that as you put up a lot of this hateful messaging and graffiti, that could be demeaning for a lot of the young people that's there. It can invite rival gangs that want to cross out graffiti and things, and now your community has become more violent because of that. A lot of the negative messaging towards law enforcement. Now, when law enforcement feels intimidated going into these communities, there's certain ways that they're carrying themselves in these places. And so I always feel like one of the better things to do is just start from a point of healing. Let's just clean everything up and then try and move forward from there. So that's really been the goal of my work. But everything gets challenged, whether it's like someone like Dr. Martin Luther King, who had people who were opposing his approach, or Malcolm X. There's always going to be people who oppose your approach. You just have to do what feels the most right for you. And for me, I love the work that I'm doing. And so when people challenge me about it, I take their responses into consideration, but I have to do what feels right for me.
Great. So next question, you seem to be able to find people who are open to hearing you, like the very tall cop in Virginia. How can you recognize them? Or do you just try with everybody and then you see what happens?
That's good. Well, I think when you put yourself out there, those people will come to you. Those people will find you, especially when you're going against the grain, when everybody is behaving a certain way and you're doing the complete opposite. There's people that will recognize that, and they'll recognize that you're different. And if they are similar, they'll find you. And now that officer, Chris, he's actually a dear friend of mine. He's now a sergeant out there in Charlotte, North Carolina. But that friendship that was formed because of that interaction right there, he literally refers to himself as the free hugs cop now, because he's like, I'm all about that message of hugs too. And that video that I shared there, that thing went crazy viral. And so then he actually did end up becoming the free hugs cop. And there's other officers that we've met like that along the way, including another cop named Chris, who I co-host the Black and Blue podcast with, who even before I had met him, he was already doing similar things out on the front lines. He had a viral video of being challenged by protesters, and they started chanting that they wanted him to walk with them, and they ended up walking 3 miles around the city just talking about how to create change. And I was like, that guy is doing the work. And so that's how my friendship formed with him as well. So we just find each other by doing the good works, and people will recognize, hey, I'm like that person, or I'm about that message. And somehow we just all get connected like Transformers, and it's awesome.
Very kindred spirits, but I like the Transformers analogy way more.
Cool.
These questions have been great. This is another really good one. So they're asking, what sustains you? Do you pray, meditate? How can you keep going?
Yeah, that's good. So all of the above. Prayer, meditate. So I just started meditating too, because like that wasn't really something that I did before, but maybe 2 years ago, I got invited to speak at a yoga conference. And I was like, what? Why would I go to a yoga conference? So by the way, I am terrible at yoga. Like I tried it a few times at that conference, and I gave up immediately. I was like, this is not for me. I am not flexible. All the years of running in my life, I don't know. I am not flexible for that. But I liked the meditation part. I liked that it was just a really good way for me to just clear my mind, especially decompress from a lot of the trauma that I've experienced out on the front lines. So meditation has been great. Prayer, of course, and also just time with family, because now I've got a big family of my own. I adopted a little girl. She's 16 years old now. I have an 11-year-old son, a 8-year-old daughter, and then we just had twins. I'll show you guys Michael and Maya here. These are my little minis, Michael and Maya, and so I've literally got like a full house myself now, and they sustain me, but they also like take part in driving me crazy as well. So there's that balance, where when I'm away from the family too long, I'm like, oh man, I miss my wife and kids. And then when I'm home too long, then I'm like, I got to get out of here. This is as bad as being on the front lines of a riot sometimes. Like it is just nonstop noise in my house with 5 kids. So, that's why sometimes I have to get away and like do my work here in the studio, because I don't have to hear them, because the twins just started preschool right now, and I'm like, okay, good. Maybe the house would be a little bit more quiet. So that sustains me. All of the above. Prayer, meditation, family, and running too. Running is just a really good way for me to clear my head. And so I encourage or recommend that all of you, that you all have something. You have to have an outlet, and anyone who says that they don't, try just walking around your block every day at the end of the day and just use that as a way to clear your head. Either do it with music or not, but we all need something, because we take on so much, and we have to figure out ways to decompress or find at least that time of peace that we can have within our own minds. So yeah,
love it. This is actually a question for me, and I hope it doesn't throw you through too much of a loop, but because we're a library, I gotta ask this question.
Yep.
And it's basically, do you have an author or book that you like or love or just feel like you want people to know that that is something that you really, you know, just appreciate or
Yes.
got something out of. And can you share that with us?
Favorite book of all time, and this will probably shock you guys, is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. Actually, and it's not even the entire Chronicles of Narnia, but it's specifically that one. And the reason why, and why it will always be very dear to me, when I was a boy living in that homeless shelter in Los Angeles. And this goes in line with the reason for the positive or the importance of the positive human interactions. And I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about it, because the reason why that is still my favorite book till today is, as I was living in that homeless shelter, there were a lot of, actually everyone that was in that shelter at the time, they were either Black or Latino, either Black or Hispanic in this shelter. Yet for some reason, there was this middle-aged guy, maybe in his early 20s. He was a white guy. He would come down every day to the shelter, and he would check in and sign up to volunteer to read to us. And the first book that he started reading to us was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it was in those moments, as we're all sitting down on the floor in our rec room there, as he's reading this book, that we forgot that we were homeless kids. It literally took us out of the shelter and took us into Narnia as we're going through the wardrobe and we're feeling the snow at our feet. And like, I still want to taste Turkish delight today, because I'm like, why is Edmund about to like sacrifice his life over some Turkish delight? And the lion, Aslan, all of it was just, it made me forget that I was homeless during that time. But what's most important about that, when you talk about the positive human interaction, and why I got goosebumps about it, just knowing that this guy that would come down there, I don't even think he lived in that community. This was someone who just knew and understood that these kids that were going through hard times probably aren't being read to. And he took it upon himself to go and check in at the shelter, to just volunteer to read. He wasn't getting paid for it. He wasn't being asked to do so. And that is just so powerful and so magic. And like, I have no clue who he is today. And here I am, probably 20 plus years later, still giving him his praise, because how much that did for not only me, but my siblings and all of the other kids that were sitting down there on the floor at this shelter. And so I think it's really important that we all find that way to be able to help others in the things that we enjoy doing. And so for me, yes, that's just tied in with my favorite book. As and someone just said, maybe he was a librarian. Maybe he was, right? Like maybe he was, and he knew that kids need to be read to, especially kids in a shelter. And that was just magical for me that I got to experience that back then. And so still till today, at 40 years old, my favorite book is still The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because of that moment.
I have goosebumps, and I am not crying again. You cannot make me. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And true to form, we did put a book list together of titles that really kind of represent what your talk was all about today. That's in the chat, and we'll share that later.
Awesome.
Yeah, last call for questions. Otherwise, we are gonna wrap this up, and it's just been so amazing getting to listen to you and see the work you've done. I'm amazed by you. You really are very inspiring, and I want to go out and be a peacemaker in whatever way I can.
I'm going to send you a free hug shirt.
Oh my gosh, I would love it. I will wear it every day.
Awesome. Cool.
So yeah, thank you all so much for joining us today to learn about the power of positive human interaction. Endless thanks to Ken for sharing your time and experiences with us. We are just really grateful that you could impart your kindness and your uplifting messages here today. And thanks once more to Pittsburgh Foundation for supporting the work of the Civic CLP Speaker Series through generous funding. We have the link in the chat for the book list, and when you leave this Zoom call, there's a short survey you might be prompted to take. Please do that so we can know if we're doing good work and we can continue to offer great experiences like this. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you. See you all.
Thank you, Ken.